Think about it. 1987, a Wednesday in August, starts out totally normal. But by the time the sun set, that day would go down in history, shattering a quiet English town and forcing an entire nation to completely change its laws on gun ownership. This is the story of the Hungerford Massacre.
So to really get why this was so shocking, you've got to picture the place. We're talking about Hungerford, a small, picturesque market town in Berkshire, the kind of place you'd call quintessentially English, where things were peaceful and big news was, well, rare.
But that Wednesday, everything changed. The town's peace and quiet completely shattered. It became the backdrop for one of the worst firearms atrocities in the nation's history, leaving a scar that's still felt today.
So how did it all start? Well, it didn't begin with some huge explosion. It was creepier than that. It started with a few chilling, separate events that just spiraled fast.
Okay, so the very first act of violence actually happened about 7 miles outside of Hungerford, in a place called Savernake Forest. A woman, just enjoying a picnic with her kids, was shot multiple times. Incredibly, she survived. The gunman then got in his car and drove to a nearby petrol station. And that's when it spilled into public view, at the Golden Arrow petrol station. The gunman, who we now know was Michael Ryan, tried to shoot the cashier point blank, but his rifle, it jammed. He fled, but not before making this bizarre 999 call, reporting a fake armed robbery, probably a diversion, before heading right for his home in Hungerford. And once Ryan got back to Hungerford, things went from bad to worse. This wasn't just a series of strange incidents anymore. It became a full-blown, unimaginable rampage. The next hour, it was just pure terror. I mean, we're talking minutes. He gets home, and the violence just explodes. He tries to set his own house on fire, fails, and then just walks outside, armed, and shoots his neighbors, Roland and Sheila Mason, right there in their own garden. This is where the killing spree really began. And what's so terrifying about all this is just how fast it happened, and how random it was. For the next hour, he's just walking through town, shooting at anything and anyone. A guy walking his dog, one of the first cops on the scene, people just driving their cars. And this map here of Priory Avenue, it really drives home how tragically random this all was. A taxi driver named Marcus Bernard was shot and killed right here in his cab. The tragic irony is that he was only on this street because police had diverted traffic to try and keep people safe. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the worst possible way.
So after hours of this absolute carnage, Ryan is finally cornered. He's barricaded inside a classroom, and he starts talking with police negotiators. And this quote from that conversation is, well, it's just chilling. It gives you a tiny glimpse into his head after he had murdered 16 people.
So this is where he made his final stand, the local secondary school. Luckily, it was empty for the summer holidays. He starts firing from the windows at police helicopters, at officers on the ground, turning it into this incredibly tense, long siege. The standoff dragged on for hours. Finally, at 8 p.m., after a long stretch of silence, the police decided to go in. And inside, they found Ryan. He had taken his own life. After almost 8 hours, the rampage was finally over. So, the violence was over, but the questions? They were just getting started. Who was this guy? What could possibly have been his motive? And the big one? How in the world did he get his hands on all those guns? This was Michael Ryan, 27 years old, unemployed, and living with his mother, who devastatingly was one of his victims that day. People who knew him basically described him as a loner, someone with a pretty obsessive interest in firearms. But a clear motive? To this day, we just don't know.
And take a look at this. This was Ryan's arsenal. 2 semi-automatic rifles, a couple of pistols, a shotgun. The firepower is significant. But here's the kicker, the part that would absolutely shake the entire country. Every single one of these weapons, he owned them legally, perfectly within the existing laws of the time.
You have to understand, something on this scale it was completely unprecedented. The local police, the emergency services, they had never dealt with anything like this before.
All right, so in a crisis in the UK, what do? You call 999, it's the number everyone knows. It's supposed to be this unbreakable lifeline to help. But that day in Hungerford, that lifeline snapped.
The system just completely collapsed under the strain. Get this, the local exchange usually handles about 300 emergency calls a day. On August 19th, it was hit with an estimated 800,000 call attempts.
Just an unbelievable flood. It meant that so many people desperate for help just couldn't get through.
The official inquiry that followed, called the Hungerford Report, it really laid bare just how many things went wrong. You had the first cops on the scene, completely outgunned. The specialized firearms unit, they were 40 miles away. Communication failures everywhere. But the most damning finding of all was the one that confirmed what everyone feared. Every single one of Ryan's guns was legally licensed.
So, this tragedy, it exposed some really uncomfortable truths. And the public outcry that followed, it was massive. It was going to lead to some real, lasting change.
I mean, the very idea of a gunman using legally owned semi-automatic weapons on the streets of a quiet English town, it forced the entire country to take a hard look in the mirror. People were demanding answers. How could this happen? And more importantly, what was going to be done to stop it from ever happening again?
And the government's response was incredibly swift. They passed the Firearms Amendment Act of 1988, and it went right after the kinds of weapons Ryan used. It banned civilian ownership of most semi-automatic rifles and put major new restrictions on shotguns. It really did change everything about gun ownership in Great Britain.
And the effect of this new law, you could see it immediately. The government started a firearms amnesty, and this number right here, 48,000. That's how many of these newly banned weapons were voluntarily handed over to the police, just taken on a circulation for good.
And all of this brings us to a final, pretty powerful thought. Hungerford became the catalyst for one of the biggest crackdowns on firearms you'll see in any modern Western country. You know, we so often see these horrible tragedies lead to a lot of debate, but not a lot of action. But this case stands out as a moment where a nation just fundamentally changed its laws because of what happened. And it leaves us with a big question, right? How much can a single tragic day truly change the future of a country? And maybe more importantly, how much should it?